stills the beating of my mind. On the blue lotus feet of my divine mother, in rose stills the beating of my mind. On the blue lotus feet of my divine mother, divine mother, 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 my divine mother.
The voice of God calls us to awaken him. How will he find us when he comes?
Awake and ready.
And when he asks us to dedicate ourselves ever more perfectly to him, how will he find us?
Awake and ready.
Let's pray together. Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
friend, beloved God,
friend, beloved God,
great masters,
great masters,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
saints of all religions,
saints of all religions,
we humbly bow to you all.
we humbly bow to you all.
Bless us,
Bless us,
purify us,
purify us,
guide us,
guide us,
teach us to relinquish our little self
Teach
teach us to relinquish our little self,
and merge with thy infinite self,
and merge with thy infinite self,
and make us your pure channels
and make us your pure channels,
to share your blessings in this world.
to share your blessings in this world.
Om.
Om.
Peace.
Peace.
Amen. Amen. Please have a seat. Welcome.
I've passed my life as a stranger, Lord, roamed far in foreign lands, but Lord, far too far. Only he who knows he's far from home, only he, Lord, understands. Only he who knows he's far from home feels the earth and understands. Sometimes a stranger did take me in, then love I thought was near. Love, Lord, where is love? As the winds upon the desert sand whisper hope, then without your smile, empty like the ocean's foam. For what joy is there without your smile? You're the sea, all else is foam. How long must I be a wanderer, Lord? You know where I belong. You know, Lord, yes, you know. Home is where my Lord's sweet presence is. I've grown tired of strangers' songs. Home is where my Lord's sweet presence is. Bless me that I hear your songs. Bless me that I hear your
Let's continue to meditate as we listen to these words from Affirmations for Self-Healing on this week's quality, discrimination. As science judges the relative speed of any object by one constant, the speed of light, so the devotee judges the relative merit of any idea by the one constant, God. Discrimination is clear only when it relates everything to the eternal absolute. Thus, while the intelligence may toy with ideas endlessly, discrimination asks, is this wisdom? Is it of God? True discrimination is not even the product of reasoning. It is soul intuition. Reasoning, even from the highest point of reference, is uncertain compared to the inspirations of superconsciousness. To discriminate clearly, meditate first. Ask God to guide your understanding. Let's affirm together first in a strong voice, and then we'll go softer and softer until we do it mentally. Resolutely I quell my inclinations.
Resolutely I quell my inclinations.
That my mind be open.
That my mind be open.
To the wisdom guidance of my soul.
To the wisdom guidance of my
A
soul.
little softer. Resolutely I quell my inclinations.
Resolutely I quell my inclinations.
That my mind be open.
That my mind be open.
To the wisdom guidance of my soul.
To the wisdom guidance of my soul.
Now in a whisper. Resolutely I quell my inclinations. That my mind be open to the wisdom guidance of my soul. Now let's do it silently, but with ever deeper concentration and feeling, lifting the heart energy as you gaze, broadcasting from the point between the eyebrows. Resolutely I quell my inclinations, that my mind be open to the wisdom guidance of my soul. Resolutely I quell my inclinations, that my mind be open to the wisdom guidance of my soul. And pray silently with me. Guide me, Lord, that in all things I know thy will, For I know that only by thy will are all things led to perfection. Oh, peace. Good morning, friends. Good morning. We know everyone, but in case for anyone new joining us online, I'm Narayan. This is my wife, Dharmadevi. And every week we share from Rays of the One Light. These are weekly commentaries in the Bible and the Bhagavad Gita. And this is week 28, Self-Reliance versus Self-Reliance. Truth is one and eternal. Realize oneness with it in your deathless self within. The following commentary is based on the teachings of Paramahansa Yogananda. Last week we considered the need for attunement with God, with the gurus, with the wisdom of others, until we make that wisdom our own. There is a strong and in fact valid belief nowadays in the need for standing on one's own feet, rather than depending weakly on others to carry us by their strength. Swami Kriyananda was once asked, "What is the best yoga posture?" "That one," he replied, "which sets you squarely on your own 2 feet." Our strength must come from within. If that strength comes from the ego, however, instead of from soul consciousness, it is like a guitar string without its sounding board. The notes it emits will be thin and feeble. Our strength must come from within, but must be coupled with the recognition of our inner link with broader and higher realities. The Bhagavad Gita says in the 10th chapter, "Everyone in this world whose life is glorious or prosperous or powerful, know that his achievement is but a little spark from the great sun of my effulgence." Jesus, in talking to his disciples, emphasized also the power of attunement with his consciousness as a ray of the divine. For this ray had descended already through him in response to their devotion. It was a sign that God was already listening to them with receptive attention and did not require to be wooed in that way any longer. In the passage preceding the one that we read last week, Jesus said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the husbandman. Every branch in me that beareth not fruit he taketh away, and every branch that beareth fruit he purgeth, that it may bring forth more fruit. Now ye are clean through the word which I have spoken unto you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself, except it abide in the vine, no more can ye, except ye abide in me." This was the meaning of Paramahansa Yogananda's counsel also, when speaking more intimately to the disciples of the need for attunement with him. Thus, through Holy Scripture, God has spoken to mankind. Om, Om, Om.
It's neat how we just keep expanding. Oh, there's nectar. I'll read to you first from Whispers from Eternity. This is the demand not to be enslaved by the ego or by ego-centered passivity. I want to use my own will, but guide it ever, Father, toward the golden paradise of all fulfillment. For I would be infinity's smiling child, confident of being imprisoned no longer behind bars of fruitless desire and withered hopes. I would break the shameful cords of lethargy that have presumed to hold me and step fearlessly into freedom. Released, I now blaze my way through forests of every limitation and delusion. Oh, my little vain ego may strut proudly, saying, "Behold my glory, worship me," but I will look through its transparent form and behold thine unimaginable beauty, clothed in the subtle form of the whole universe. The silence-tuned hearing of my soul will ignore that tiny boasting masquerader, my little self impersonating thee, and will listen rapturously to the wind-born, fragrant music of thine own matchless voice, whispering across the ages, "I am he." I didn't even ask Ishva and Aaron to chant "No Birth, No Death," but this morning we were blessed with that song. So this topic of self-reliance, it's with the little s, even though it's at the beginning of a sentence, so it looks like it has a big S. It's reliance on the little self versus reliance on the infinite self, the true self. And that's why I asked us to meditate on whatever in us, in whatever way we are able to feel how our little self presents itself and offer that little self into the infinite self, because it's always different for each one of us. I was meditating, and actually we were giving a class, I think it was in Thousand Oaks, and a friend said, "Well, you keep saying offer the energy up, offer the devotion up, offer every feeling you have up. What does that mean? What does it mean to offer it up?" I was like, "Well, that's a good point." Because it can be kind of vague. What does that mean? Are we actually directing the energy upward? Are we just, is it a beautiful sentiment that we're, "Oh, here, I'm giving it to you, Lord"? It's kind of all of it. And I was thinking the way that we can tune into this during our meditations. We've heard, probably all of us have heard, the one thing that God doesn't have is our love. So we need to give God our love. Well, what's really the purpose? If God has everything, God is us anyways, God is loving through us, God is doing all of it through us, what's the purpose? Does God really need our little human love? I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's for us. Because when we offer our love, our little S, our little L of love, that love is purified. That love, we say, "This is all I got, Lord." Big L, Lord. This is all I've got is the little L of love. Take it and make something beautiful of it. And God does. God transforms our love. God says, "Well, okay, I got a little something to work with here." Maybe it's even just a tiny little bit that we're able to give to God. But he takes that and he makes it everything. He makes it the all-pervading love of the Divine Mother. We have to realize that we can't lift a finger without God's power flowing through us. We are, not that we need to be self-deprecating, "Oh, I'm nothing, because that just becomes false humility. Doesn't do us any good. But as much as we can say, truly, I'm nothing, because God is everything, God is the doer in everything that I'm doing. I'm lifting my finger to do Hong Sa. God is lifting my finger. And is it my finger? No, it's God's. God's doing all of it. There's a beautiful story about self-reliance versus self-reliance. that maybe a lot of you have heard, but I'll tell it anyways. It's a beautiful story of a devotee of Babaji. And he is a servant, and he goes to the great astrologer, and then to later be great saint, and probably he already was, but Shankara. And so he goes to Shankara for a reading, and Shankara says, "Oop, looking at your chart, sorry, it looks like you're dying tomorrow. There's just no way around it. You know, the chart doesn't lie." And he's, you know, the man is obviously pretty distraught about the news. He's going to die tomorrow, and there's absolutely nothing he can do about it. And so he goes back to his guru and says, "Babaji, Shankara told me I'm going to die tomorrow." And he says, "Oh, really? Well, go back to Shankara and tell him that your guru said there's absolutely no way you're going to die tomorrow." So he's like, okay. Goes back and tells Shankara, "My guru says I won't die tomorrow." He said, "There's absolutely no way. I am the greatest astrologer." And even a simple-minded astrologer can see you're dead tomorrow, and there's just no way around it. So if your guru's right, I will become your guru's disciple. So he goes back, and I think, you know, sometime there's a lot of travel that happens in there, but maybe it was even that night that he was to die. So that night, terrible storm comes, thunder, lightning, it's shaking the house, and Babaji comes and is there with his disciple, and the disciple's, you know, "It's coming for me, death is coming," and he says, "Don't worry," and Babaji lies over top of him, sprawls across him, and protects his disciple. And, you know, who knows what was happening all around trying to get this guy. But he was saved by the grace of his guru. And then, of course, he goes to Shankara and says, "I'm still here, check it out." And Shankara then becomes Babaji's disciple. But the reason that this is so important in terms of this topic is we usually just go through life in our chart, in our destiny, in what the stars, what our karma is leading us to, and just we're just an effect in the world. We're just bounced around on the winds of fate, if you will. And yet, if we read Autobiography of a Yogi, we see this chapter, Outwitting the Stars. We're not meant to be boxed in to our little chart of this is who we are, this is how we're going to live, and, you know, maybe we'll get somewhere good, and oh, whoops, I was born on a waxing moon, so things are going to get worse throughout my life, darn. No, the guru is there. Swami Kriyananda, he had what, I don't know much at all about astrology, but he had what was, in astrological terms, a horrible chart, just like, oh my God, he had some cross thing that was like, you're going to have such terrible troubles in your life, and it's going to be really, really difficult. And, you know, outwardly looking at Swami's life, he had a pretty challenging life. He had just about every illness known to man, and thrown out of his guru's organization, and anything you can imagine he went through. But he wasn't touched by it. He was touched by it maybe when those things happened, but he said even during that time when it was the darkest in his life, when everything that he had given his life to was suddenly taken away from him, he could feel, when he reflected on it, he said, I could feel that underlying, that undercurrent of joy still there. And more we could see through his life of discipleship, just any even little bit of him that was affected by the outer world, just suddenly nothing. There was nothing that could touch him. And not because of him, the little h, but him, the big H, that was working through him. And he said later in his life, I don't know where Kriyananda ends and Yogananda begins. It just all became the work of his guru flowing through him. As I was reflecting this morning on this topic, it occurred to me that we could relate it to the three sort of philosophies of the great Indian teachings, if you will. Philosophy isn't the right word, but we don't really have the right word in English. But of the Sankhya, Yoga, and Vedanta. For those who have taken Raja Yoga, you probably recognize these words. And the Sankhya tells us why. And so if we think of it in terms of this topic, why seek the big S of self-reliance? The yoga, how? How do we live more in the great self? And Vedanta, what? What does that look like? What does it look like to live in the self? So we have the great masters, the great saints who have shown us through their example what it's like to relinquish the ego, to surrender the ego completely. And interestingly, my mom, who is a very spiritual woman, she sends me periodically homilies from priests in the Catholic Church, and I read them, and they're beautiful. And I think, what a wealth of information, not information, a wealth of wisdom and inspiration that they're drawing from. They're drawing from the same teachings that we're drawing from. The New Testament in these readings, the Bhagavad Gita and the New Testament. But what was lacking in all of them, because it always gets to in the sermon, so what do we do? How do we do it? Because otherwise it's just platitudes. What good does it do us to know that we should pattern our lives after the saints and after the masters? Of course we know that. And what I'm always so surprised by is the way it's picked up from the outer reflection of how the masters act and how the good works. Yes, of course, Jesus gave to the poor. He loved the poor. He loved the tax collectors. He loved people that no one else loved. He embraced lepers and he helped everyone. But what about what he said was the greatest commandment? When the Pharisees asked him, what's the most important commandment? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's inner communion. And not as an afterthought, but as the second greatest, love your neighbor as yourself. Love your neighbor as yourself is great works in the world. What you do unto the least of my brothers, that you do unto me. Very valid teaching. Absolutely, we have to pattern our lives in that way after the masters. But first and foremost is loving God, is communing with God. Why does this get lost in our world. This is why Swamiji wrote the Festival of Light, that the noble taper of inner communion with the Lord burns low and is ill-attended. We have to be the reminders in this world, because we can do all the good works. This world isn't going to change from the outside in. We have to change it from the inside out. And the world is right in here. The universe is our little universe. It doesn't matter how grand our work is here. When we come together, there's a small little group of us. But this is the most worthwhile thing in the world we can be doing. It's giving our lives to God and praying for others to do the same, and not even praying outwardly. I mean, we can for sure, but being that silent, loving example. It's the greatest way to change the world around us, is by what we do for ourselves. Interesting, I'll close with this, that whenever we've talked to Anaya Swami Jyotishan Devi, and before when we would talk to Swamiji, he said, I'll start with what Swamiji would say, I love to hear about all the great things happening in the work, how it's growing, how people are coming, and how this event was a success, and this and that. He said, but really, I only care that you're changing in your heart. He said, that's what gives me the most joy, bless you, is when people write to me and they say, I feel more love in my heart. Then he said, then I rejoice. And Jyotish and Devi, they always have said to us, you know, it's a big work that we've all been given. You know, we're here in LA, millions of people all around us, and it just seems daunting at times. Why aren't people wanting to change and to make a change in the world through themselves? And they said, you know, all the work we've been given outwardly, it's just kind of think of it like good, busy work. Because the real work is just inside. Doesn't matter if we're teaching yoga, if we're teaching meditation, if we're in construction, if we're physical therapy, whatever it is that we're doing. We could be flipping hamburgers, which I love that Zoe and I got to flip hamburgers on the 4th of July. We could be flipping hamburgers and be changing inside and be moving closer to God. The greatest work, don't ever be fooled that there's anything outside in this world that's more important than your inner life, your inner connection with God. God bless you.
I have